Hello and welcome back to Raise Gaming and more Diablo 4. It's now finally time for me to do my usual talk, taking a look at the classes and the best builds for each in the current season, the Season 9. What are actually the best options for each class? Let's get into it. So first up we have Barbarian, with the lowest pick clear of the classes in Season 9 currently. It's a 106 as the top clear, but the footage for that was too low quality, so I'm showing this run by PXX instead, who's just behind with a 105 at this time. The top build in this case is the Lunging Strike Barb, and that's clear because the top 8 builds are using the same build. For this run then, we see how clearing the pit itself went really well, done in roughly 6 minutes, but then the rest of the time was spent at the boss entirely, which was a lot less smooth by comparison, over 7 minutes spent at the boss alone, which is a big problem for the setup. Anyway, Lunging Strike is all about the basic skill itself, with your usual shout setups and modifiers, and the useful ground stomp for stun build-up. The core of it though revolves around the new unique Hooves of the Mountain God. These boots trigger an effect of Max Fury, draining Fury, in exchange for your basic skills to now start to cleave and deal more damage. So if you're playing around maximizing that effect on Lunging Strike, it makes it amazing for clearing packs, and we can go a bit further with it. With the Pain Gorge's gloves, you can mark targets by using non-basic skills, like, the stomp, and then mark targets hit by a basic like lunging will echo out that damage to all currently marked enemies for increased damage. So the AoE clear becomes very effective, which we can quickly see with this build during this pit clear. Add in some other benefits like bleed from Lunging Strike and you can spread that around, while Rage of Harrogath the chest piece. This unique means that when bleeds occur, you're also triggering CDR. That keeps your shouts off cooldown, stomping ability free to spam, chaining that AoE into itself. Other details that feel more standard for basic builds are present then, like the Moonrise aspect for attack speed for basics, or Shard of Varathiel to increase basic damage in exchange for resource. So you're going to need a lot of resource generation, therefore aspect of adaptability just makes sense, because you get to generate resource with the basic itself. This combined with other classic damage multipliers is sort of the core of it. Overall then, I think it's a fun and fresher build for Barbarian, with new interesting AoE potential behind it in this season. It's just a shame that Barb is clearly in a weaker state compared to most of the classes right now, not able to stack enough output in this current state. With how Barbarian's been doing in the last few seasons, I do think it's due for a higher performing season soon, or maybe this season they'll just buff some numbers. We'll see. Next up though, we have Rogue, which is ever so slightly ahead of Barbarian, but I also don't think it's fair to say that completely. Rogue does have a top clear of 107, which is higher, but the reality isn't as good. The next top clear is 102, and there are many 102 clears at that point. Basically, it means the average top clear for Barbarian is higher than Rogue, so it's a bit between the two, neck and neck, for being bottom performers of the season. But they can both clear over a tier 100, which is kind of the minimum requirement, so is it that bad? Depends on how you feel. Either way, the familiar Rogue name of Matthias takes the top spot, and as the repeat rank 1 pick clear Rogue, I definitely weigh his opinion heavily. As per the description of this run then, he feels the build is strong and could clear, say, a tier 109 if they had perfect gear. But that would still leave it 5th or maybe 6th overall. Anyway, what is the build? It's Twisting Blades, again at long last. The original dominating build for rogues is back, this with a focus on poison to modify the damage, also using the Death Trap ultimate for grouping enemies up. But this is definitely not a Death Trap spam build like we saw in the last seasons. The build itself gets to do great work on anything really, AoE or single target, because you're using that same core no matter what, which is Twisting Blade, impaling a target and then it returns to you. So you zip through the targets and it zips through them, catching up with you, dealing great damage. With the classic Blade Dancer aspect though, they land on you and start to rotate around for easy damage and AoE, so you can press against enemies for good output. Otherwise, familiar core damage multiplier setups are here. You've got poison as the main focus, so poison trap, imbuements. We can increase the output of poison imbuement with the corruption aspect easily. You've got the bands of Icarus Rose, the gloves. They boost the trap itself, doing some interesting things like helping the trap trigger multiple times, deal full damage over time, benefits from all of its upgrades, and increasing them pretty stacked. The contamination aspect means the traps will burst for more damage, and if it's a crit, even more so. So obviously leaning into crit makes sense. Then you get to double up with Bursting Venoms aspect, because your poison imbuement might then also spawn traps for free. That's awesome. So you just lean into the damage over time multipliers and max into poison, with the usual defensive stuff via Dark Shroud, so that's going to spawn from crits, and then an aspect that also makes that generate a barrier for much needed survivability. So yeah, Poison Twisting Blades with a Death Trap to help group is a strong, mobile build that definitely calls back to the launch Rogue days, just in a newer form. At its highest potential though, it is still behind the remaining 4 classes, so is that a problem? I'm not convinced it's a big problem because it's not that far behind 3 of the next classes we're going to talk about. Next up then, we have Necromancer with a pick clear of 111, just barely. We're literally seconds, like less than 5 seconds before they run out of time. This player, Rani Neck, managed to actually get the clear. However, Necromancer is still doing well with quite a few 110 clears and 109 clears behind this, so it's in a strong place. What build are we seeing here? Well, I'm glad to say that it's the shadowblight or dot build that's focused on triggering as many instances of shadowblight and spreading that out as fast as possible and as much as possible. There are various ways that you could do this though, so seeing variance in the builds is quite interesting. And god am I glad that I'm not seeing Bloodwave as the top way. You know, the last season Bloodwave was a top or the top build, and before that it was definitely Bloodwave, so I really didn't want a 3rd season pressing Bloodwave again. So I was really glad to see that this was a popular and effective build with a different setup. The ultimate in this case is Soul Rift, which allows you to spread out vulnerable, build up a barrier, survival, spread that darkness and shadow damage, and trigger loads of Shadowblight at the same time. With good CDR, you're able to have amazing uptime on this, and through tempering, you can increase the duration of the Soul Rift. So it's actually a really potent, long-lasting, offensive and defensive button. With this setup though, we're seeing something interesting, which is Bone Prison. With very minimal investment, this player has basically modified the Bone Prison to, well, cause a guaranteed vulnerable on those in it, but then they take a multiplier of damage inside of it. So you need to stack everyone up and slam the prison on them and then start building up the shadow damage over time. It works and is definitely going to be a good way to help increase your single target DPS as well as a reliable option. So I like it, but other top clears are using slightly different setups. Some invest heavily into the Reaper's Pursuit passive, so each darkness skill on your bar gives you increased movement speed but also more damage multiplier. So instead of having a cooldown that makes you deal a lot more damage while it's up, it's just like consistently better damage, and you know, you're scaling damage over time, so improving that goes a long way. But ultimately the idea is to stack that shadow damage up as much as possible, using Ebon Piercer to shotgun blast these blights out, which also makes the enemies take more damage. And you basically mix between blasting with Ebon Piercer blights and spamming corpse explosion. But yeah, the idea here is weaving blights between corpse explosions to maintain the damage multipliers from consuming corpses through Corpse Eater, and obviously shotgun blasting as much blight as you can. Super fresh and fun build, something I've not played before with Necromancer, so I've really enjoyed it this season. Obviously, I don't think it's a bad thing either that there's so many variations on it. The version that heavily leans on Bloodwave as another source of shadow damage instead of Soul Rift, but then there's also minion builds that are doing great, which are basically just Shadow and Shadowblight builds, but just use some skeletons in the mix. So Necromancer overall has done well this season, with a kind of key build concept that could be run in a bunch of different ways, but it's still all about spreading that shadow damage. Considering it's only 2 clears behind the next 2 classes, it's not that far behind either, so I think it's in a solid place. Moving up then, we have Druid, with the top clear being a 113 by the player DMC, which unfortunately is in quality that's not quite good enough, so here's a fantastic 112 clear that's just behind that. Something in particular note about this then is the lack of all 6 skill slots being used. You'll actually see top clears using 5 or even 4 of the total slots, which is strange to see. But either way, in this case, the build is the new poison pulverize concept, made great by their new unique weapon, Rotting Lightbringer, which generates a poison puddle when you use pulverize. Now by standing in it, you set up the overall power potential, and then further pulverizers start to splash out nearby puddles for AoE. You can also increase the size of that AoE via pulverize and its radius, which is pretty funny, but also super unique. Thanks to the rapid bear aspect, you can convert damage directly into poison damage and deal increased poison damage. So pulverize becomes poison, and pulverize spawns poison puddles, which overpower splash damage all around themselves. Then through other pulverize modding, you can scale its damage through earth passives and aspects and paragon, what you'd imagine. And through the tankiness of the bear and raws to debuff enemies, you become quite tanky. Then you've got more poison benefits thanks to say the season powers, turning your catalyst into a poison dealing beam, further helping all the builds really when pit pushing, since you know there's passive powers like stripping the damage resistance auras and even barriers, which is going to go a long way for everyone. Anyway, just a quick overview of that. It's interesting to see something tied even slightly to overpower do well after its nerfs. And in this build, you've got all the usual stuff like Tibalt's Will, the overly popular Air of Perdition and Shroud of False Death, and other familiar damage increases. But I just think this poison and puddle splashing concept is really fun, and it's good to see it do so well. But next we have the second highest and fastest clear available for a tier 113. It goes to Sorcerer. So it's still the same tier, but it was, faster, putting it slightly ahead. There is a major difference here in that there's a lot more sorcerers with 112 clears, multiple 113s, so on average it is stronger. The build here is all about Hydra, with the two top 113 clears having slight differences between them. A heavier focus on fire and scaling damage or burst, there's like one skill difference. Makuna has the current top clear, or rather fastest clear of the 113, with Roxy just being behind that, which is what we're looking at here, since Makuna's footage is just a killing blow. Now watching the gameplay, it's ridiculous, just tanking the packs face to face and spamming Hydras. Unlike a lot of clears, we see how the last 4 minutes of the run were actually spent at the boss, showing just how insane this build is for single target DPS. The big thing here then is Ophidian Iris, the unique amulet that turns Hydra into a core skill, which through that you can scale the damage in many ways. But obviously on top of that, it also becomes a larger 3-headed Hydra with explosive attacks. You can grow it larger though by increasing its damage as you do, so you play around your juiced up Hydras as much as possible. With the Serpentine aspect, your Hydra deals more damage per mana you have at the moment you summoned it, stacking mana up being a direct way to power it. Then with Ice Shards, you can spam those into targets and build up the passive of Hail of Verglus, the unique helm. It means the ice shards spread out more and more, dealing increased damage each time you damage an enemy with it. So, with super high cooldown reduction, you're maintaining all of this and your ice armor for strong defense and offense at the same time, thanks to the Stormwell aspect. Between the two top versions, it looks like a difference of burst versus burning damage though, letting you ramp DPS compared to instantly bursting. High-end pit pushing obviously means super big health pools to get through, so ramping damage goes a long way in that context. But yeah, it's Hydra time for Sorcerers, and there's a good few versions to consider depending on your current gear or what you're trying to do. Basically, you're pit pushing or you're not. For me, it's just good to see something other than Lightning Spear for Sorcerer for a bit, but it would be nice to see them get some more build variety for Sorcerer in general. Lastly though, that brings us to the top class of the season, the build. It's Spiritborn, and it clearly is, with a current top clear of 123 as I make this video. 10 tiers above second place, which in this context is a massive gap. Like at this point, 5 higher tiers means you need to like double your damage type of thing. They're 10 tiers above. So while Spiritborn's been suffering every season since its launch season where it was king, it's finally back on top. But with what? Well, it's a mix of poison and thorns either way, but it's basically tied to quill volley / rake and the Jaguar Spirit Hole. There's a funny double dip occurring to sort of skyrocket the output of them. We're looking at the gameplay here from Resistance though, since the top clear isn't in great quality for us. But what we're looking at is still an insane 122 clear. The build largely revolves around quill volley normally then, but we're seeing how the top clears in pit pushing have dropped that for rake. That's for the specific purpose of pit pushing because, the nice nature of the volley is great for clearing packs and moving around the world. With this pit pushing version, we see how this player carefully groups up the packs and then stands within them to reflect dodge and basically thorn damage them, cleaving with the rake. They become ultra tanky thanks to this insane barrier, and you can see how their resource essentially never drops the entire time. Through the vortex skill, you get to pull the enemies in and then keep them in, tightly grouping them for the long fight that occurs. While you've got counterattack to dodge blows and reply automatically, you've got toxic skin to get the poison in, armored hide to generate all that resources, but also maintain constant 100% block chance, so mega survivability. For rake though, we see the wild claws aspect slotted in, so extra jaguars on the rakes, while fell soothsayers aspect helps generate vulnerable, but then killing vulnerable targets echoes out this explosive damage. We see that on display as the packs start to fall apart once anything starts to die, and then that starts to occur. In this version we see Razorplate working overtime too, with all those thorns to reflect the damage back at the pack. All of this takes place in Mystic Circles thanks to the Planes of Power aspect, powering Jaguar skills to increase your damage, stacking up and up. So, it's an interesting pit version of a build that normally focuses on quill volley, only to drop it for the specific pack killing, pit pushing gameplay. This type of deck is just the kind of thing that's needed to push pits at this crazy level. But even then, as you go down to like 118s and below, you do see some quill volley in use. No matter what, the gap between Spiritborn and the other classes is extreme. And after many depressing seasons for Spiritborn, I think that's fine. But yeah, there you have it. That's my overview of the top builds and where it all stands at the moment. I am interested to see if the small patch with the slight balance changes does have any real impact. But for the moment, it just gives us a good idea of where things are. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.